Hello there. In this video, I'm looking to detail the lore for the Violators, a prominent Slaaneshi warband at the time of 3rd edition. While getting very little since that time, outside of one appearing among the ranks of Lucius's Raptors and only being depicted with a single miniature with Vinny the Violator over here, there is actually a substantial amount of lore to go through, and to start with, their appearance in the book Demon World. The Fall of Torvendus. Observation towers leaned insanely, shaking as if with laughter, and trained spindly arrays of clockwork sensors on the heavens, seeking new experiences in the pattern of Torvendus's many moons. Temples to Slaanesh were suspended on ropes of human hair above bottomless pits, silken pavilions protected by huge sweeping blades of gold and silver armatures, and demon-bound engines studded with diamonds. Billowing clouds of incense turned the sky purple-black, where segmented skyworms coiled and banners to the pleasure god rippled up into the sky. In a wide ring around the city's very heart stood spiked barricades guarded by the traitor space marines of the Violators chapter, their armour sky blue with purple-grey ichor weeping from the joints. And beyond these barriers stood Charybdia Keep. The city itself didn't have a name, and was usually referred to as the city, or the capital, or not mentioned at all, for it was simply the hinterland of Charybdia Keep. The mines beneath the city supplied its materials, and the city itself was a mine for slave courtesans, substances that could only be rendered down from the living. The keep was the seat of power on Torvendus, a power that had achieved dominance such as few had ever achieved in the planet's long history. The keep was the spiritual, military, political, and physical linchpin of the planet. It was built of grey, fossilized remains precisely quarried from the rocks of Torvendus, tessellated into massive straight-edged blocks. Polished ribs and gleaming teeth sparkled on its surface. Corners were braced with webs of skeletal fingers. Ghouls of ossified sea monsters were packed into the dense foundation blocks that formed pillars sunk deep into the earth. The keep was a kilometre high, and every stone in its construction had once been something living. A tremendous scream echoed throughout the world. In the city, orgies and complex blood ceremonies paused as the scream washed over them. Far below in the mines, final tendons of sanity snapped, and for a while there was a pandemonium as the slaves fought each other at the rock face, trying to anoint themselves with one another's blood to appease a waking god. The legionaries laid into them with nerve whips and pain glaives until they had been battered back into obedience. On the battlements surrounding Charybdia Keep, the Space Marines of the Violators chapter made new patterns in their devotion scars to signify that a new enemy had arisen. Something had awoken, and it seemed to be calling itself Shil Sakar. The ruler of the world and devotee of Slaanesh, Lady Charybdia, summoned her council. The door to the chambers swung open. The last member of Charybdia's Council of War entered. Commander Demetrius of the Violator Space Marine chapter was about 4 meters high and the same across. A massive metallic block mounted on hydraulic clawed-footed legs. Each articulated shoulder ended in an arm-mounted weapon. A 4-barreled assault cannon on the left and a bouquet of barbed energy lashes on the right. The flat surfaces of his ceramite-encased body were painted a pale blue-grey, like dead men's lips, with the symbols of the Violators, a lightning bolt crossed with a dagger, wrought in gold over one side of the chest. On the other, dense script had been etched, telling of hundreds of engagements which Demetrius had fought and the kill marks of important foes he had slain. On the centre of the chest, the sarcophagus where Demetrius's physical body was held was a fleshy knot like an unopened flower, pale and dead, but pulsing with a machine's heart. The dreadnought stomped up to the table, servos growling. The petals of the sarcophagus opened and Demetrius's old body was revealed, a scorched corpse with arms and legs sheared off, the face rotten and drained, fronds like tendrils of some sea creature wavered from the skin. They were exposed and elongated nerve endings, the only way that any sensation could be delivered into Demetrius's sense-dulled mind. He had been horribly wounded on some distant battleground, and recovered. Though his body had been wrecked, his tactician mind was intact, and his chapter had entombed him in a dreadnought shell so that he could continue to lead them in the internal war that chaos demanded of them. "I am glad you could make it, Commander," said Lady Charybdia. "How is life on the walls?" "Tolerable, my lady," replied Demetrius, his voice a low crackle-rattle from his ruined throat. "The air tastes of war. We shall serve our god soon, I think." "That is looking very likely. I can trust you and your men to ensure that the current situation is resolved rapidly and with minimum disruption to our sacred work. Is my trust justified?" "It is, my lady. Every one of my battle brothers is worth 1,000 barbarians and more. Good. I suspect that I shall soon be calling upon you. Lady Charybdia's voice was cold. Compared to her, Demetrius was a brute, his own lust for experience limited to the violence of warfare. Lady Charybdia had once been like that, revelling in her slaughter, but she knew now that it had just been a phase on the way to the current perfection of her senses. Demetrius was stuck in the pattern of bloodshed, which became ever more ordinary for him as he absorbed every experience that battle could give him. One day he would become unable to experience anything at all, and his mind would wilt away, leaving just the dreadnought to house some other butcher. The Violators were extremely valuable, undoubtedly the best troops on Torvendus, but their presence reminded Lady Charybdia of the stagnation that was the fate of every unwary servant of Slaanesh. "Caducia," said Lady Charybdia, "appraise us of the situation, if you will. Perhaps 100,000 of the tribespeople? We killed a great many, but more are flocking to their cause. We cannot estimate the numbers of demons. Sil Shakar once commanded millions. But this is not Shil Shakar. Shakar is dead. Yes, my lady, but some inheritor of his could rival him in power. Not if we send him back to his god first, Commander." "My lady," Demetrius answered, "the demon lord is yours. The blood god is the foulest of all our foes in the heavens. I expect your battle brothers to execute the full anger of Slaanesh against his creation." Demetrius' smile split the skin on his cheeks, so a rictus grinned down from the width of his face. "A pleasure, my lady." His servos buzzed with excitement. "My lady, do not misunderstand us. Slaanesh would never desert you, but there are many prophecies, and many of them are coming true. A calf with 3 heads, as the seers of the Crimson Knights foresaw, and a litter of half-devils with tentacles for hands, such as was written by the prophets from the undersea kingdoms. There are many omens of destruction and mistrust. The oldest are there. They say that something has returned that means the pleasure god ill. It has indeed. The blood god's spawn walk Torvendus again. Prophecies can come true all they like, sage. No number of demons can hope to breach the city and hold it against us." Demetrius laughed, a rasping, throaty sound. "You have fully 1/4 of the Violators chapter on your walls, lady. They could throw the whole Maelstrom against us, and we would hold." Demetrius flexed his massive metal frame, feeling the weight of the assault cannon and the sinuous living tendrils of the neurolash. He racked smoke grenades into the launchers of the upper surface of his carapace, feeling the ovoid canisters filling the breach, spinning the barrels of the cannon and letting the massive caliber ammunition trickle enticingly through the chambers. Demetrius itched all over for battle, from his wet fleshy core to the sensitive sheets of armorplast protecting his sarcophagus. Once he had been terrified of being entombed in a frigid cold ceramite box, unable to feel the sensations that gave him reason to kill, but Demetrius's nervous system, refusing to give up its lifeblood of pleasure pain, grew like roots into the fabric of the dreadnought body and made him more sensitive to the tide of battle than he had ever been as an able-bodied space marine. It would be a good fight. He longed to feel fire scorching his paintwork and blood spattering his artificer-honed armor plates. "Commander," voxed a voice in Demetrius' ears. Demetrius turned to see Tech Marine Kleis, a tendril servo arm reaching blindly over his shoulder pad. "Tech Marine, are we ready?" "The fleet is prepared. They were hungry after so long. It took some effort to wake them up and get them fed, but they can fly at an hour's notice." "Good. I want you with us, Kleis. Nothing can succeed without the fleet, and they listen to you above all others." "I am proud to serve." "You will be proud. You will be proud when the blood god's whelp is dead, Kleis. For now, revel in the battle and remember for whose praises you fight." Kleis nodded his helmeted head. Like many Violators, he had never removed any part of his armour. Slaanesh looked favourably on the chapter, and often altered their bodies so that their sensations and pleasures were more immediate. No one ever knew for sure what Kleis really looked like anymore. And that was part of what made the Violators beloved by Slaanesh. Every Space Marine was a temple to the pleasure god, his flesh sacred and inviolate, and displaying those holy mutations was like throwing open the doors of a temple to any passerby. Demetrius himself rarely revealed what he looked like beneath the massive armoured hull of the dreadnought body. When he did, it was in the presence of only those who truly represented the ideals of Slaanesh, like Lady Charybdia herself, or that of a great enemy before the kill. "The force is selected then, Commander," said Kleis. "Our best," replied Demetrius, voice grating from the dreadnoughts of Oxcasters. Koivas, Hagen, most of the assault units. Plenty of steel, plenty of battle lust. Demetrius turned back to look over the city, with its millions of lights and glittering seas of spear points. Lead the battle brothers in their war gear rites. They must feel every bullet they fire. There will not be another fight like this on Torvendus for a good long time. Cleis nodded his head. Cleis headed off below the battlements to bless the bolt guns and armour of the Violators, that Slaanesh might send every sensation they felt right into the soul of the wielder. Hagen would be murmuring prayers devoutly, while Koivas would be filling his system with the cocktails of combat drugs he had become all but immune to. Devriad's squad would be carving devotions onto one another's armour. Every Violator would be shuddering with anticipation for battle. Slaanesh had ordained that every one of them would see bloodshed when the sun next went down, both those who stayed to defend the keep and those who accompanied Demetrius onto Charybdia's own sacred mission. It would be a good day, thought Demetrius, one of the best. Commander Demetrius flicked through the Vox channels, relishing the taste of the confusion. He revelled in the potential of his allies' terror. The graver the threat, the more profound the thrill of combat. It was clever, he thought, how the Horde had attacked, raising the ocean and sending in those who had survived, raiding the rivers and seas. Worthy almost of a Space Marine's planning, but not quite. Below Demetrius, the waves of the New Blood Ocean crashed against the walls that ringed Charybdia Keep. Floating bodies were gathering against the buttresses of the defences, and as more rose to the surface there would be a formidable stinking flotsam at the base of the wall. But it made no difference how many slaves and conscripts died. This day, no matter what the attacking hordes could dream up, they would never be able to get past these walls and into the keep, not when the Violators were here to meet them. Demetrius would not be among them. He had other matters to attend to. There was a sudden roar behind him. He pivoted his massive dreadnought body to see the beast rising from its moorings behind the wall, as did all the 100 Space Marines Demetrius had assembled on the walls. They were mostly trained for close-quarter bloodshed, armed with chainswords and other more exotic weapons they had fashioned or found. Hagen, who led one of the largest warbands, wore a huge, scissoring, crab-like power claw on each hand. Koivas fought with the barbed tendrils that grew from the lower half of his face as mandibles, keeping his hands for the twin bolt pistols he always carried. Their armour was pale blue, often stained with the juices of their bodies that ran from the joints or riven with battle scars worn proudly. Every head was turned towards the beast that rose level with the battlements amidst the bellowing of its engines. The Thunderhawk gunship was monstrous. Its wings were covered in thick, gnarled skin, between which was suspended the huge undersung fuselage painted in the Violators' colours. Muscular tentacles had grown through the metal and clung all over the hull like roots. The front viewports were deformed into warped metal slits, pale glows layering out. Nothing living had been into the cockpit of the Thunderhawk gunship for centuries, ever since a demon had first been enticed into the craft's machine spirit. Now the whole fleet was a menacing flock of huge winged beasts, able to strike from the air with greater speed and precision than even a Space Marine could manage. A further pair of Thunderhawks similarly mutated rose above the battlements. They turned and their bellies opened, revealing payload compartments ringed with grav-cushioned benches. Demetrius waved his whip arm, and Koivas yelled an order to his men, who clambered up into the belly of the first Thunderhawk. The other warbands followed suit, 100 Chaos Marines in total, enough Violators to grace any battlefield. Demetrius himself stood under the last Thunderhawk, as tentacles draped down from the payload compartments and wrapped around him. They hauled his huge metal body into the heart of the craft, and the fuselage closed beneath him. There were 30 Chaos Space Marines in here with him, 70 more in the other craft, bathed in the dim biological glow of the Thunderhawk's innards. The air was thick and close, and smelled of the potent warrior hormones that coursed through the veins of the Violators. "Cleis," voxed Demetrius. "Commander," replied the Tech Marine. "Take us out." "Yes, sir." The grav couches engaged as the Thunderhawk shot forward, carrying within it the intention to slay the Blood God's spawn for a second time. "Open!" yelled Commander Demetrius, and the belly of the Thunderhawk gunship split open like a seed pod. The city whirled beneath, dizzying towers and clouded sky alternating with swirling blood as the noisome air was sucked out of the passenger's hold and replaced with a howling wind. The noise was vast, air rushing through the hold, mixed with stuttering explosions from the gunship's cannon. Commander Demetrius's eyes peered through the dreadnought's ocular sensors and picked out a sudden ripple of grey flesh shot through with greasy, smoking machinery. Not that he needed to see. His mutated nervous system could feel the blood god's taint all around. Shakar was in the blood ocean right below them. "On my mark," yelled Demetrius over the vox. "The landing zone is the temple precinct of opulence inflamed." He jabbed his whip-taloned arm towards the circle of purple-streaked stone sweeping by beneath them, supported on a column above the blood surface like a huge stone mushroom. "Mobile fire patterns, and keep your wits about you. We'll lure him up." His vision strobed as acknowledgement runes flashed on the back of his eyes. His sergeants were ready. "Drop," ordered Demetrius, and suddenly the grav couch restraints were disengaged, dropping the 30 Space Marines packed into the Thunderhawk straight down. Their jump packs ignited as one, slowing their descent and giving them control over where they fell. Demetrius himself didn't bother. His sarcophagus split open and he angled the thick metal plates like fins, guiding his massive metal body as it fell. His skin was open to the rushing air. It pulled at his exposed nerve endings, sending a thrill of pain through his broken body. It was like plunging into an ocean of razor blades. It was for experiences like this that Demetrius held Slaanesh above all other gods. But it would be just a taste of true sensation before the killing began. Demetrius slammed into the sacred precinct, smashing a crater in the stone around him. The shock absorbers of the dreadnought's legs deadened the impact, and in an instant Demetrius was battle-ready, assault cannon scanning for targets, sarcophagus closing around him like the carapace of a beetle. The precinct was circular, and complex diagrams were etched in white on the black, purple shot surface. A cluster of sacred buildings stood in the centre, several temples to minor aspects of Slaanesh, a life torch like a huge brazier where sacrifices were immolated, a statue of Argulian Vecht, and a tendon shrine. There were no worshippers here now, though. A few legionaries were taking shelter amongst the buildings, firing paltry volleys of arrows at the tribesmen clambering over the far side of the stone disc. Demetrius fired a salvo from his assault cannon, rejoicing inwardly at the feel of hot shrapnel bursting from the many barrels. Explosions stitched along the platform edge, and several southern barbarians were burst apart by cannon fire. Violators were already landing all around Demetrius, chain blades drawn, snapping off bolt pistol shots at the invaders. Demetrius left the warriors for his men to deal with. He stomped towards the nearest edge of the precinct platform, looking down at the blood ocean that churned beneath it. Where was he? Where was the demon? There, looping in and out of the blood, swimming at supernatural speed, leading a shoal of his lesser demons. One of the Thunderhawks swooped low and kicked up fountains of blood with cannon fire, and with a sudden roar, Sil Shakar leaped from the water like a sea monster, massive mechanical wings thrusting him from the blood. His head was a fanged bronze gargoyle mask, and those huge jaws slammed shut on one of the Thunderhawk's wings. Demetrius could hear the shriek from where he stood, as the wings came away in a fountain of fuel and ichor. The Thunderhawk banked insanely, flipped and spiralled towards the platform. It overshot Demetrius and ploughed into the precinct in a shower of gore, skidding on its torn belly and careening into the cluster of temples. The monumental statue of Vec was toppled like a great tree. A fuel tank ignited and a blossom of flame erupted. Violators sprinted from the wreckage, ignoring the flames that wreathed their armour. Many survived, many died. Sil Shakar, Demetrius vowed, would pay for every death with 100 deaths of his own. Demetrius swiveled his chassis and blasted a volley of assault cannon shells at Sil Shakar, who was clambering up the side of a nearby tower. Shots stitched around the demon prince, bursting against its flesh and the pulsing machinery. The arriving Violators were at Demetrius' side, and Demetrius heard Hagen yelling for disciplined fire. Those Violators, armed with bolt guns and other longer-ranged weapons, opened fire at Shakar, spattering his hide with small weapons fire. A missile launcher barked, and a trail of smoke led to an explosion just above Shakar. The demon prince's metal head turned towards the precinct, and the baleful, fiery eyes focused on the Violators forming ranks around Demetrius. Sil Shakar leapt off the tower and plunged back into the blood. Ripples carved through the water towards the precinct, scattering bobbing corpses. "We have him," voxed Demetrius. Above him, the third Thunderhawk swooped low, belly open to deliver the last payload of Violators. "Brothers, prepare for countercharge." Chaos Space Marines were forming up behind their commander. Demetrius's own neuro lashes were charged and buzzing. Demetrius's ocular sensors scanned the surface of the blood just beneath the lip of the stone platform. The ripples were gone. Shakar had dived deep. He calculated the demon prince would leap when he emerged, one kick bringing him up over the edge and onto the platform, right into the middle of the Violators. There was a thunderous sound of breaking stone. The platform cracked, and a huge section of it was raised up, spilling traitor marines off their feet. Another, and it was split apart entirely, Shakar's metal head breaking through, and his talons hauling him up. The whole platform tilted. Demetrius kept his footing, as did most of the Chaos Space Marines, but Shakar's huge metallic beak snapped, and Demetrius saw armoured limbs severed. Every bolt pistol let fly at the demon prince as he hauled himself up through the broken platforms, the bolts blowing chunks from his flesh and raining down boiling demon blood and spatterings of oil as he lunged at Koivas's warband. They had him at bay. Now it was time for the kill. Demetrius stomped forward, assault cannon barrel red hot as he sprayed shells at Shakar. He lashed out with his other arm, and the barbed whips tore deep into the demon's thigh, carving right through the muscle, exposing glinting brass bones through rents that rained gore. Shakar bellowed in pain and swiped down with a taloned paw. Demetrius met it with his own whip-fingered hand, deflecting the force of the blow and ducking beneath Shakar's reach. He was blasting away into the demon's torso at blank range, lashing out at his leg again. The whips twined around Shakar's ankle and tightened, biting through the muscle. Demetrius dug a foot into the stone, and the servers of his legs screamed as he pulled as hard as his dreadnought body would allow. The power plant mounted on the body's back glowed red hot as its reactors pumped every last scrap of energy. The whips bit against the bone, but it was not bone, Demetrius realised now, for Shakar's entire skeleton seemed to be made of hot brass and steel. The weight of gunfire battered Shakar like a gale. His skin was puckered with bullet wounds, and the membranes of his wings were tattered. Chunks of demonic flesh flew everywhere. The beast howled, and as Demetrius pulled, its monstrous body toppled, crashing slowly to the floor of the platform. Violators gunned their jump packs and leapt onto the huge heaving form, hacking with their chainswords like woodsmen chopping up a fallen tree. Demetrius wrenched his whips free of Shakar's legs and dodged past the demon's lashing arms. Raising his assault cannon, Demetrius emptied his ammunition hoppers directly into Shakar's face. The brazen skull bent and fractured, writhing metal mandibles splintered. Flame glared from the sockets, and Shakar bellowed in pain. Blood and meat were still raining down, kicked up by the chain blades of the Violators, and the bolters still pumped shells into the heaving body. Demetrius wanted to feel the death of the demon prince who had waged war on Torvendus twice. There might never be a death like this again. He split open his sarcophagus and exposed his desiccated body to the outside air, so Shakar's death throes would flood directly into his nervous system. Shakar thrashed wildly, but most of the Violators held on or avoided his claws, tearing at his skin with guns and blades. Demetrius felt the pain flooding off the demon prince like a heat haze, pure and monstrous. The anger of the blood god mixed with the anguish of a cornered beast. It was raining blood spattered against Demetrius's bare skin and set his nerve endings afire. Hot pain flooded through him, igniting old pleasure centres he thought were long dead. Slaanesh would be well praised by the intensity of experience Demetrius was absorbing in the pleasure god's name. Shakar was keening a high, terrible howl. There was a sudden commotion amongst the Violators at the edge of the platform, and Demetrius tuned into the Vox channel to see what was happening, angry that he might be disturbed during such a holy act of experience. "Hundreds of them! Fall back by fire teams! Fall back!" It was Hagen's voice. His warband were already turning and retreating, forming up around their flamers and plasma guns. And suddenly, like a dark tide washing against shore, a wall of grey demon flesh erupted over the edge of the platform in a shower of blood. 100 demons of the blood god poured onto the platform, summoned by the howling of their prince. The first ranks were toppled by Hagen's bolter fire, but there were too many of them. Demetrius watched as half of Hagen's warband disappeared beneath the bronze talons and snapping claws. Still Shakar bucked like a wild animal and was up on his knees as the Violators began to fall back from the demons. "Kill the prince," bellowed Demetrius. "Kill it first! Hold! Hold!" But it was to no avail. Individual warbands were being swept aside by hundreds of attacking demons. Still Shakar brushed off the Violators who still clung to his back. Some escaped on the jets of their jump packs, others were cast brokenly to the ground and crushed by Shakar's massive feet. This could not be. Shakar could not live, not when Demetrius had vowed his death to Slaanesh. Demons leapt at Demetrius, but he knocked them aside, battering them with his whips and stuttering assault cannon fire into them. The Vox was alive with calls to fall back. Demetrius tried to halt the retreat, but those who obeyed his orders were dying as they were surrounded and overwhelmed. Koivas was still alive, his battle brothers cut off in the shadow of Shakar, fending off ranks of demons. Demetrius would have to finish this himself. He was angry beyond belief that he had been robbed of Shakar's death. His Violators, the greatest warriors on Torvendus, were in disarray. The enemy they had been charged with destroying was still alive, standing over them and bellowing in triumph as more Chaos Marines were snatched between his claws and crushed. But Demetrius had vowed to kill Shakar. If he had to do it alone, then so it would be. He threw aside the demons lunging at him and strode towards the towering demon prince, demon's blood sizzling against his exposed skin. He knocked demons aside with the barrel of his assault cannon as he ran, clearing a path in front of him with the barbs of his whips. The assault cannon chewed through the last demons that stood between Demetrius and his quarry. He felt the ammunition hoppers were almost empty, and his power plant almost rupturing with the effort. He didn't care. Even if he had to spend a year inert while the chapter's artificers mended his dreadnought body, it would be more than worth it. Shakar saw Demetrius and lashed down at him. The Violator ducked past the gore-slicked talons and charged into Shakar's leg, barging him back down onto his knees as he emptied the assault cannon into the demon's torso. Demetrius's whip wrapped themselves around Shakar's neck and dragged his huge equine skull down. The last few assault cannon shells rattled into the demon's face. Huge taloned fingers wrapped around Demetrius's sarcophagus as he was hauled off the ground. Shakar pulled, and Demetrius felt a flash of pain as the whips were torn from the arm of the dreadnought body. Shakar reached up with his other hand and tore the assault cannon arm off at the shoulder. The world span around Demetrius. The shock of such a massive injury sent the overcast sky swirling over his head, the towers of the city dancing. 1,000 demons gibbered up at him, their din mixed with the gunfire from the last resisting Violators. The Vox was a wild cacophony of death, and Demetrius realised that he was screaming too. There was one chance. The power plant of his dreadnought body was white-hot with exertion. If he overloaded the plasma conduits, he could rupture the casing and disappear in a ball of plasma fire, taking Shakar's head and upper body with him. He would die, but then he had often contemplated the ultimate sensation of death, and that, mingled with Shakar's demise, would be a greater sensation than could ever be imagined. Demetrius was still thinking this as Shakar ripped free the power plant and hurled it off the platform into the sea of blood below. Then, forcing the side of Demetrius's sarcophagus further open, he reached in with a claw and hucked out the morsel of living flesh. Still Shakar dropped the scrape of wriggling muscle into his maw and felt it slide, still moving, down his throat. Then he turned to the demons, smiling around his feet, and beckoned to them to follow him. They had seen off a troublesome enemy, but there were many more battles here for them to slake their thirst. Lady Charybdia looked out across the ruins of the outer wall, trying not to gag on the stench of congealing blood. She had retreated into her private chambers, where surely nothing could get to her, but as she watched through the scrying orb that hovered in the centre of her bedchamber, she began to wonder if anything in her city was safe anymore. The dim noises of battle penetrated the walls of her keep, drowning out the droning of the souls imprisoned in the stones, echoing the carnage on and around the walls. The Violators were holding out as best they could. She had chosen well when she had brought them to her walls, for every one of them was equal of 100 of the barbarian animals. But there were far more than 100 invaders for each Violator Marine, and Demetrius had not yet returned as promised. The city was supposed to be impossible to transverse for an attacking force, but Shakar and his accursed sorcery had completely reversed the situation. Now it was Lady Charybdia's legion who were trapped, trying to face a foe who could disengage and sail across to the next attack point. And now that foe had reached the defences of Charybdia Keep itself. A tide of men and demons was crashing against the walls. Towers nearby had been felled to form causeways across which horsemen could gallop and foot soldiers could scramble. The Violators were forming fire teams that faced every point of entry with a wall of bolter fire, but more sections were coming under attack. With each passing minute, explosions tore chunks of the battlements, and men clambered up from boats beached on the growing reef of corpses beneath the wall. Walkways and towers were brought down, forming bridges onto the walls. For every breach swept clear by the Violators, another one opened up and vomited a torrent of enemy warriors onto the walls. Lady Charybdia glanced one more time into the scrying window. The Violators were now little more than a pocket of blue armoured figures, surrounded by a baying horde of enemies. There was still no sign of Demetrius or his Thunderhawks, but Demetrius was her last hope. If just one of his flying craft remained, she could call for it to land on the roof of the keep and pluck her to safety. The walls were lost. The Violators had withdrawn into the keep itself, leaving a trail of heaped bodies. Lady Charybdia could hear the ugly barking of their bolters from the dome, and the feel of bloating as the keep's doors and staircases were choked with the dead. She could hear the gunfire of the Violators and the war cries of the enemy as they charged. She could hear the tide of blood washing against the foundations of the keeps, and the splintering of stone as another tower fell. In those last few moments, her heightened senses brought her the sound of a city dying, of a mighty temple falling, and the smells hit her too, the burning wreckage and the overwhelming stench of congealing blood. A hot wind of suffering blew over her, and she could see the pale light of death dawning over her city. Amakir watched the city aflame. It had become clear for some time that Lady Charybdia's forces were doomed. The surprise assault over the ocean of blood had cut the defending army into pieces, isolated and crushed by the mobile barbarian forces that attacked from everywhere at once. The barbarian leaders were evidently rather more astute than Lady Charybdia had suspected. Even the Violators had been overwhelmed. There were no better troops in the Maelstrom, save of course the Word-Bearers, and it took a stroke of tactical brilliance to force them into fighting a losing battle. The Sonic Dreadnought. The Sonic Dreadnought is a distinctive iteration of the Mark IV pattern, used by the descendants of the Emperor's Children Traitor Legion, as well as a number of associated renegade factions, such as the Violators and the Flawless Host. The Emperor's Children were the first Chaos Space Marines to draw upon the vile blessings of Slaanesh, and the first to unlock the secrets of the cacophonous and blasphemous sonic weaponry. Such weapons draw upon the raw power of the warp, modulated by the psyche of the bearer, to unleash a deafening and discordant sonic assault that is as lethal to the foe as it is exultant to the user. Such weapons range in scale from the handheld sonic blaster to the siren carried by the Hell Knight class walker known as the Subjugator. The Fall of Saint Josmain's Hope. Amongst the notable forces of Abaddon, of the legions of chaos seeking to set the universe alight with the unquenchable fires of chaos, were the renegade Astartes of the Violators, with 3 confirmed actions within the Cadian sector according to Imperial records. The Chaos Assault on the penal world of St. Josmain's Hope being the most notable. Seeking to establish a forward base of operations, Dreadclaw drop pods would be deployed in the first wave against the penal world as the forces of the Despoiler swept into the Cadian system at the outset of the 13th Black Crusade. The world fell soon after, the inmates of its military prison rising up against their jailers as the first wave of the Violators attacked. Dispatch PD 24-25-93. Imperial Adeptus Arbites, conducting routine searches, have uncovered plans and materials for smashing security in St. Josmain's Hope, along with lists of prisoners worth recruiting to the cause of the enemy. Hundreds of arrests have been made, primarily among the members of the Corrective Rehabilitation Movement. This supposed charitable organization had portrayed itself as being committed to giving the criminal classes a last chance to serve the Emperor and atone for their sins. Forewarned, we plan to smash this treacherous organization before it can put its plans into effect. Brutal close quarters fighting erupted all across the continent-sized prison, and many of the guards kept a bullet for themselves rather than be taken by the frenzied inmates. Welcoming the traitor forces as liberators, the inmates were to be horrifyingly disabused of this notion, as those allowed to live were instead taken as slaves for the Chaos Fleet or conscripted into its armies. The harrowing reports of the Inquisition were wrought with terrible details of the Violators, which filled those who learned of it with horror, for no man, no matter his crime, could surely deserve to have the attentions of these vile creatures visited upon him. traitor ships would spread throughout the Cadian system, several being picked off by shadowy Eldar vessels that vanished as mysteriously as they arrived, but the bulk of the Chaos Fleet advanced directly on Cadia. Soon the defences of every world in the Cadian system was tested, and despite the efforts of the Commissariat, word spread of the atrocities being committed upon St. Josmain's Hope. With morale badly shaken, every effort was made to bolster those war zones most affected, with Creed ordering a series of redeployments that rotated out those units whose fate was apparently wavering. Following a week of disastrous events upon the penal world of St. Josmain's Hope, the Lord Castellan had issued an order. The world of St. Josmain's Hope was to be destroyed. St. Josmain's Hope was all but lost, and was being used as a staging point for Chaos forces. Should it fall entirely from Imperial control, it would soon be used in this role so that the flow of enemy forces and material into the system would become an unstoppable tide. Recapturing the world was a fool's errand, and as such, Creed proposed its destruction. Though none in the council of his forces took such a proposition lightly, the approval to proceed was unanimous. Exterminatus was beyond their resources in the time available. The agents of the Inquisition confirmed this, and said that their ships which carried such weapons were many weeks distant. Logan Grimnar too confirmed that none of the available vessels of his fleet carried cyclonic torpedoes, and that neither did any Astartes ship within range. The Navy put forward the plan of instigating a massive Nova cannon bombardment of the world in the hopes of causing a degree of tectonic instability, but all available intelligence suggested that the enemy fleets blockading St. Josmain's Hope's orbital space was too strong. The bombardment vessels would not survive to launch a single shell, let alone the 100 or more required to complete such a task. It was this last suggestion, though, that set in motion the train of thought that led to the eventual plan for the destruction of the world. The representative of the Adeptus Mechanicus, Adept Gaul, expounded the notion of creating the tectonic instability in another manner. Overloading the genitorium grid of its main prison complex would pierce the world's crust, causing the meltdown to sink through the outer crust and into its mantle. Should the meltdown be triggered in the correct manner, fatal tectonic movement could be triggered, thus causing the crust, followed by the mantle, to tear itself apart. The drawback was that such an objective would need to be completed by a team of operatives on the ground, for it could only be attempted remotely. These operatives would need to be highly skilled, and they would need to be infiltrated directly into the heart of the chaos-ridden main prison complex. Some in the council doubted such a party could be assembled in time, until the Inquisition took a hand. It was an unlikely mix, including Marines of the Space Wolves, Howling Griffins, Subjugators, and Iron Knights chapters, 3 squads from 3 different Imperial Guard regiments, a cult assassin, 5 tech priests, and a number of additional personnel, in addition to the unnamed pair of Inquisitors themselves. Ordering an evacuation of all Imperial forces on the surface, the strike team went to work. In the end, St. Josmain's Hope was left as nothing more than an asteroid field. The whereabouts of the Violators in the aftermath of the 13th Black Crusade is unknown. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this research project of mine, if you would be so kind as to like and subscribe. Goodbye.